Hi, buddy. It's Jeff here, and I want to do a video here on the topic of return on investment within the translation industry. I don't want to call it localization. I just want to call it translation, authoring, and translation. Kind of keep it really simple because it's localization is one little specific thing, right? But this has come up a lot of times, and I want to explain how I've kind of dealt with this. Specific because I've tried to make a return on investment, an ROI calculator about a year and a half, 2 years ago. If the dates, probably December 2020. Yeah, a little over 2 years ago. Or yeah, a year and a half to 2 years ago. And that I think was when I finally got it done when I was working on it. So I want to kind of explain that. There's nothing really confidential about this because I was doing a lot of research on what has been published elsewhere. So so I want to make sure that there's no corporate kind of intellectual property that I'm revealing or anything because I was specifically using other published materials, which I was citing. But I want to go through and explain kind of how I got to this and the problem. So I was specifically working on some terminology projects. And one of the biggest things when you're working on terminology projects that is software, trying to automate things and make software features and do things is to justify the business need and how much it costs. And so I began to kind of look at, well, you know, and my background too is not just doing, technical geeky stuff, okay, computational linguistics. I also was director of sales or business development at TransPerfect, and we sold this stuff, and we would sell terminology packages and samples and stuff within the sales cycle, but not as independent things, but as a part of a service of a bigger package of things. And so what you do is you embed these terminology. You don't talk about terminology by itself. You always embed it as a service into authoring processes or translation processes. And whatever types of translation you want. It can be media, multimedia, it can be documents, it can be websites, doesn't matter. Terminology kind of fits into that as a module. That's kind of a step in the process to be able to create harmonized terminology and all that standardized so that you have better translations in the end and better content, readable content. So there, when you sell as a part of a service, it's like you don't talk about it. You talk about it, but you sell as a component, right? But not all the time is this possible. And right now, I'm not selling translation services. I'm trying to work on features that try to do things to help improve processes. But I got to sell the idea, right? so, uh, and I got to sell why we need to do these features. And this was kind of the challenge. So at least we got that set here. It took 3 minutes to say that, but I think a lot of everyone who's watching this video has gone through the same thing, right? And I was thinking, I can't be the first person to like think about this, right? I don't want to invent something by myself. I mean, I've invented a lot of really cool, innovative stuff going back a few decades. A lot of the stuff I do now is less innovative in that way. It's more automating things. But like I said, I can't be the first person. There's no way I'm the first person to really think about this. I can't be that. I'm not. I'm not. It's not that I can't be that smart. There's got to be other people who have thought about this, right? Of how to estimate terminology return on investment. And I'm talking about terminology. I'm thinking localization, translation, in general, authoring and translation. I can't be the first person who's thought about this, right? And I've seen a lot of posts on LinkedIn, and this comes up over and over and over again, right? So I'm kind of using this. This will be a video to actually post in all these different posts. I replied to all these different posts. So as you go here. So what I did was I began to investigate who has done anything on return on investment, ROI, anything related to investment, business justification about terminology. And I wasn't doing this full time. I was kind of doing this while I was doing other things, right, about the features. But I wanted to kind of develop this. It took a few months to actually get it going and find it. And I came across a number of articles that are always cited. I mean, Kara, she's got some. I think Barbara's got some, uh, you know, indication, but it wasn't like the tangible the thing I needed. It was like this is a need, right? Terminology is important, but I want to know. I mean, I want some calculators, right? I want some KPIs. I want something that's going to be able to help me to do this quickly because I don't want to reinvent this thing. Then I remember I don't have the document here, right? I changed computers. It's all off another disk, and I don't want to go find that disk and then make sure I get the cables, the special cables to get to the computer and stuff to go find the document. I'm just kind of explaining this. So I don't remember people's last names. Sorry for that, but I'll tag you, right? So, um, and I remember so I finally got down to a presentation. Actually, it was a conference presentation and an article. So by Luigi Musi and Isabella Massardo. Um, and it was at a localization world. I can't remember which year. Sorry about that. And it was in Multilingual magazine. I can't remember which year, but just a few years ago. And they had done the research too. They had actually done the research like me. Um, and they went back and started citing a bunch of really cool stuff. And you really need to read this article or this presentation. Read this article because it's actually really good. They actually did their homework. Um, and then they said that they had actually, I can't remember if they said in there or they mentioned in the post that they had actually checked with Uwe Omega at a conference to get his input. And it all pointed back to a diagram. There were a couple kind of key diagrams. And I can't remember who was there. I don't remember. It's in my PowerPoint presentation, going back 5 years in that PowerPoint. But I'll try to look it up and tag it too. But I want to do this video now. I've got this on my top of my head here. Right? And the thing was, it pointed back to an article going back quite a long way that people reuse, and you see statements. And sometimes one of the articles I saw talking about it, actually, they put an extra zero in there. And one of the things I said, this is wrong. I mean, it can't be 200 times. It's only 20, right? And so the way you interpret it, the way that the problem with this article, or that their interpretation of these things, and going back to an original article that I contacted Luigi afterwards, I said, I was doing this. I said, look, I'm not sure if it's this or that. I'm not sure if it's 20 and 200. And he said he had actually gotten the original article. He actually found it in a library and gone back, and it was kind of, depends how you interpret it, right? And he said he'd have to look up too and go back in his archives. So I got my archives. He's got his archives, right? Um, but so I kind of want to summarize here the findings, and how you can apply it. I'm not going to give the statistics and the exact figures of how I applied it in the company I work for, but I just kind of want to talk about how it's applicable. And the hard thing, again, is trying to isolate terminology from the rest of the services world of authoring and translation, all that, right? Content generation, whatever you want to call this stuff. Trying to isolate a specific thing and then try to justify the value of that by itself. This is the key. This is the really hard part. When you, like I said, you embed it in the service, you just charge the service, and you charge more, you charge as a package, right? So that's the easy part. Here it's trying to do it separately, and that's the tough part. And I think this is going to apply to the rest of the whole translation field, to other things, right? It's not just this research. How much is value of research? Like when you work in teaching, like in a business, and I worked at a business school, and so you're teaching, you're paid for doing 30% of presentations and 70% of research. Okay, so that's how it goes. So they calculate that your pay based on that, and that's how much you do. So the same thing are researching terminology. I mean, how much does that cost, and how much is the value of it, and what do you get out of it in the end, right? So this is kind of a key thing for figure out how much something costs and how much you're going to charge in the end for someone to be able to do this, or fund the project, or fund the feature, or whatever you want to do, right? So what happened was the key diagram that kind of gets interpreted or misinterpreted in a various ways, and I kind of reread this from different points of view and different perspectives, and talked to Luigi and kind of decided on the final, what my calculation would be. And you have to think of it as the way to think of it as a linear process where you got steps, right? So you got in the terminology system. And the terminology is going to be an Excel sheet or a database. It can be whatever, okay? If you manage your terminology and everything about the definitions and things about that, and you make changes to it in the original source system, and a system can be an Excel sheet, okay? I don't want to make it like you got to have a big platform. But if you do everything relating to a term entry with all its metadata, information about that term entry, if you do it in the source system and you edit it, okay, so if you make changes to it, you update it. The calculator, this article said that I think it was something like 0.5 something. I mean, it's kind of a low number, right? It costs 0.5 in addition, right? Or 0.5. I had to look at the exact number. So it has if you do it in the source system sheet or whatever, it's a low cost if you do your additions and changes and modifications in that system. But once you start having to make changes after you've gone further down the cycle, and the cycle is you might be doing documentation research and things like that, and architects, and you can do your architects and planning stages. If you do it at that point, then if you do it while you're actually authoring content, then if you're doing the revisions of the authored content, these are different stages, okay? Authoring or additions or editing or revising of the authored content. And then you get to the translation stage. You get the translation revision stage. And then you can see that there's a whole process, right? And the whole thing about this ROI calculator concept, or what it was here in this, was say that if you go further down the cycle of these different steps, and you find something to change in the entry about a term, like business intelligence. Now we want to get a definition of it, or now we want to give a context of it. We want to have some annotation of the information about business intelligence and how it's different, or antonym, or homonym, or antonym or a synonym of some other thing. We can call it predictive analytics or business analytics. So we can call it that, right? Or business intelligence, business analytics. These are basically synonyms, right? Kind of related synonyms. What's an antonym of that? And you can imagine all these things about this term, right? Called business intelligence. If you want to begin to specify that somewhere, but you're farther down the cycle, and you actually define business intelligence, not in the source system, in the Excel sheet of the database. You don't define it there. You actually define it further down the stage in a document. You start defining it there, or you start giving examples of it, or different kind of synonyms of it in the document, and not in the source system. The cost of updating it, going back, is expensive, right? And so the thing with this calculator that's interesting is that at each stage, going further and further down the cycle, you begin to have a higher level of cost of making that update to that term. And so it goes from a low number, like was 0.5, to when you finally get down to the translation final publication level, right after you've done all these steps, and you start publishing it, right? Authoring content and translation content, everything multilingually. You get to a figure that's 20 times more expensive than the actual, and so it was 20 or 200, right? Because depending on how you calculate, how you read the thing, right, interpret it, and really it doesn't matter if it's 20 or 200. It's just way more, right? Way more than 0.5. Okay. And it becomes astronomically expensive. And on top of it, you do it in other languages. You're applying this, and it's costing more in all these languages, not just in one language, right? And so what was important to see in this is, okay, so this is the way to calculate the cost of just updating terminology, or updating something about that entry, that specific term, 1 or 2 words or 3 words, right? Just the cost of updating, okay, and standardizing, let's call that, kind of simplify this. And so what I did is then I started looking, well, how much does the term cost? And so started doing research on that. And there were some figures. And there was a figure, I can't remember who it is. It's in the document that I did a few years back. I tried to cite people, but this one I can't. So maybe I'll put it in the comments here of the video. The cost, what it came down to, are the different figures. And the one that I kind of decided on, which I found, it was $150 per term. The cost of a term to just do all the entries of a term in some database or sheet or whatever is $150. Okay, at least got a baseline to start with, and then if you start applying this cost figure, the calculator on top of it, you start multiplying, right, for each language, and this again is just for doing terminology, right? Um, for in languages, this is not and trying to update these term entries. It's very specific. And so I took that and I started, and I said, oh, how many terms do I have in a database, right? And how many potential duplicates and triplicates do we have? And started calculating all this. And I'm not going to give the results of the calculation, but I'll say it was kind of big, right? So, and it was a very good exercise. It took a few months to kind of get it down to something I could present, because I was kind of reiterating it and checking with colleagues and seeing if they agreed and if they interpreted what I was saying in the same way. And I think that's really key to make sure when you're presenting. But it took a long time to find this information, and to find it in a way that it was easy to interpret. And I just really want to thank Luigi and Isabella. And they just recently posted up a comment on this and tagged them, and they posted the actual link to their article in Multilingual Magazine a few years back. They said I was probably the only one that read the article, right? So I'm making sure that a lot of us read the article. That's because I think this is really good, to go back and build upon what others have done, and not to try to reinvent this wheel, because this is a wheel we don't want to reinvent. And I think this really applies to everything related to authoring content and localization translation. And right now with this whole artificial intelligence hype cycle, I don't want to call it hype cycle, with being able to generate content with various AI applications, and there are a few right now happening on LinkedIn. There's a lot of buzz around it, right? The whole thing is, what is the cost of doing these things? And when you start, okay, we're going to automatically generate this. What's the cost of doing it by a human being using the brain to do research? And what's the cost of the research for do these things? What's the cost of doing the actual content, data entry? What's the cost of updating it? What's the cost of revising it? What's the cost of making changes to it all along those cycles? And a lot of things happen in parallel. They're not a linear cycle. Remember, we're in agile mode here, folks. We're in we're in kind of continuous improvement, and there are lots of continuous delivery, right? We're in the cloud, right? So you can't be saying, hey, we're going to publish this and it's going to go through the cycle. It's all waterfall. It's going to happen this way. It's going to be happening. And this is the translation industry has struggled with this for a very long time. And I've talked about that in other videos too. With that whole agile thing. And I've worked in where we can do it, right? But it's very difficult, because this whole, we got to have it perfect and then you translate it, right? You got to do it first, and then you do it, and you don't ship anything until it's sim ship when you do it all to finished, right? And that slows everything down, and you can't do that in a continuous delivery kind of mode. So I think this is figure out the business justification, the cost, the return on investment, and in the end, you got to think about return on outcome too. And I made another video about the difference between return on investment and return on outcome in this field. Go watch that separately. But I encourage you to go and to think about this. Look what others have done. And it really pointed back to a guy named Guy something. I can't remember his name. There in Canada, there had been a report. I never actually got a copy of the report. which is kind of a pain because I'm reading what others have said, right? And I always like kind of get the thing with the person said I did, maybe. And you got to get these books, right? And it's kind of hard to find them when they're not published anymore, right? So you got to find libraries you can get it from, right? And wait a long time, or find people who have copies of it, right? Copyright stuff, right? So that's the experience of dealing with a return on investment in this field of the language industry. And I'm talking just about terminology. I haven't even extended it out to all the different other things of which the return on investment of multimedia, video, and image localization. I haven't gotten there yet. And what's the cost of captions and subtitles? And what's the business justification of a lot of other things, right? That what's the return on investment of the editing stage? What's the return on investment of or matter of outcome on machine translation post editing, right? Uh, these things, I've done a lot of work in all these areas, and when you're making people pay for the services, their return on investment is the cost you're charging. You're trying to balance that. You kind of leverage that across a bunch. Often the service a lot, and then you may just charge, and the whole thing is, do you discount it or not? Because you're using translation memories, da da da. Made a whole video about that whole thing, and authoring memories made a whole video about that topic too. And the cost is what's your base cost? All these different parts, like I said, research parts, the actual data entry, the things, and what's the cost of if you want to generate it automatically, having the systems do that. What's the cost of a human brain to be able to do some things? Um, and what's the added value in all costs? So that's my thoughts for this morning while I'm having breakfast in a restaurant. And thanks for listening, being patient for me to kind of walk through and explain this because I think it's not simple. It's not something you can do in 1 or 2 minutes. It's not a little teaser, right? These are kind of things that people have to spend a lot of time thinking about it, and they're trying to look for this information. That's why I'm kind of trying to present it. Go explain how I went through that process of trying to find it and to be able to justify it myself, right? So hopefully this can help you justify it and say, you got to do some research, folks, and find it. Um, and I'll try to have maybe a playlist called Return on Investment and have my videos that are related to this all together in one place. And I'm pointing back to the people that I've cited. Say, again, I've not invented most of these things. I'm just citing and reciting and quoting others, what they've done, and then just saying how I apply it and explaining how I apply it, not showing the results of it, again, for reasons of working in the company, but just showing how I went through that same kind of interpretation process, and not interpretation translation, but interpreting things, interpreting how I'd read and implement something, and then kind of sharing how I did it. So hopefully that helps you today, and let me know. And yeah, it was 20 minutes, over 20 minutes, but that'll probably save you many hours and days, right, of trying to figure it out. So probably worth the 20 minutes. Thanks a lot for your time.